Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We are holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Beis, and we will be learning today Emir Tzah Hashem Daf Nun Gimel Amid Beis. We begin, however, on Nun Gimel Amid Aleph. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Netilas Yadayim, and we begin today with Siman Kuf Samach Sif Hey, 3 lines off the bottom on Nun Gimel Amid Aleph. So in the previous year, we had been discussing one of the things that passel water, that renders water unusable for Netilas Yadayim, and that was when you perform a task with the water. So you wash dishes with water. You really wash your hands with water. Your hands are dirty, and you wash them with water. You soak bread in water. Anytime you perform a task with the water, that water is now considered mei shayvchin. It's now been transformed into wastewater, and since it is now considered wastewater, it is no longer usable for Netilas Yadayim. Now, says the Mechaber here in Siv Hey, Ein malacha paiseles, the act of performing malacha with water, only ruins the water for Netilas Yadayim purposes. Ela b'mayim she'uvim. That's only by mayim she'uvim. That's water that was drawn into a keli. So you took water from a stream and you put it into a keli. You took water from a river and you put it into a keli. That water is now mayim she'uvim. That water is now susceptible to the psul of malacha. If you perform malacha with that water, it will become pasul for Netilas Yadayim. And this is true, bein shehem b'kelim, bein shehem b'karka. This is true whether the water that you perform the malacha with is now in a keli. So, for example, if you filled up a bucket, a 5-gallon bucket from the river, and now you performed malacha with the water in the bucket, you washed a dish in the bucket, so now all of that water is puzzle. And that is also true, bein shehem b'karka. Or if you took the mayim she'uvim and you poured the mayim she'uvim into a depression on the ground and you did malacha with it, it would also be puzzle, since it was at one point mayim she'uvim. But there is no psul of malacha if you go ahead and you do malacha with water that is in a stream and has always been in a stream, or water in a mikveh. So if you go over to a river and you wash your hands in the river, you could still wash the Netilas Yadayim. You could still take a keli, fill up a keli from the river, and go ahead and do the Netilas Yadayim from a kli, from the water of that river. You don't passel the water in the river by doing avodah with the water in the river. So too by a mikveh. You can take a dish and go over to a mikveh and wash a dish in the mikveh. You could still take water out of the mikveh afterwards and do Netilas Yadayim b'keli with that water. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Chav Daled, Shehem b'karka. If the water at one point was mayim she'uvim, it doesn't matter. Even if the water is in the karka now, if you do malacha with it, you will passel it. Pirish, afilu haya b'shas malacha b'nacha b'karka. Kevin shehayu she'uvim mitchila. Since originally this water was mayim she'uvim, you filled up a bucket from the river, you turned the water into mayim she'uvim. Now if you pour it into a depression on the ground and you do malacha with the water while it's in that ditch, you will passel the water. Paiselos behem. Avakishasa malacha behem b'mechuber. But if you do malacha with water while it is still b'mechuber, it never was mayim she'uvim, kisherim l'netilas yadayim b'tolush, it will remain kosher for the Netilas Yadayim even if you remove it from the river. So again, if you do malacha with water while it's b'mechuber, you do malacha with water from the river, but you never made it mayim she'uvim, you never took it out of the river to make it mayim she'uvim, you can now take a keli, dip it in, take water, and use it for the Netilas Yadayim from a kli. Ois Katan Chav Hey, loy b'mei mikveh. However, there is no psul of malacha on water that is from a mayon or from a mikveh. Says the Mishnah Berurah, that means, like I just said, The water that's in the river, you can't ruin it by doing malacha with it. The water that's in the mikveh, you can't ruin it by doing malacha with it. Says the Mishnah Berurah, this chiluk between the water of a mayan, the water of a mikveh, and mayim she'uvim is only germane to the question of mayim that became possible from doing avodah with it. But when it comes to water, which this we're going to discuss later in today's shir, another psul that we have on water, another way water becomes unsuitable for the netilas yadayim, is if that water is for whatever reason not suitable to be for a dog to drink. If it's eina roy l'shtias kelev, that water is not usable for the netilas yadayim. Now, in the context of that halacha, there's no difference between mayim she'uvim and the water of a mikveh or the water of a ma'ayin. Kol zeh l'inyan asiyas balacha, aval l'inyan im nifsal l'mishtias behema. But in the context of the halacha, that water that's not roy l'shtias behema is not usable for the netilas yadayim, ein chilik bein she'uvin l'mei mikveh. In the context of that halacha, there is no difference whatsoever between mayim she'uvim and mikveh water l'netilas yadayim. But if you want to do tvilas yodayim, you want to immerse your hands in the water of a mikveh or in the water of a ma'ayan, and that water is not roy l'shtias kelev, mutter af bazeh. That's mutter, even if the water is not roy l'shtias kelev. When it comes to the psul of water whose appearance has changed, ayin la'el b'Mishnah Berurah Sivkat and Daled, where we already discussed that. Now we move along to Sivav, 2 lines from the bottom in the Shulchan Aruch here, and then Gimel Lamed Aleph. Chamei ha'or, water that has become heated through fire. So you turn on your hot water tap. That is chamei ha'or. Noitlim mehem lo yadayim. You are allowed to use hot water for the netilas yadayim. Afilu hein chamin shayatzer ledes. Even if the water is so hot that the hand would jump back from it, so as not to become burned. And the Ramah says here in the parentheses, a way to understand the temperature of yatzer ledes is pirush kol shekreisoy shel tinoik nichve himenu. If it's water that is heated to the degree that the bare skin of a toddler's stomach will become burned, that is already yatzer ledes. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Chavav. Shayatzer ledes. What does this mean? That the hand is soledes. Shenimsheches me'achareha. It means that the hand jumps back. Shaloi tikaveh, so that it should not become burned. Ois Katan Chav Zayin. You're allowed to wash netilas yadayim even with water heated to such a degree. Says the Mishnah Berurah, V'yesh machmirin b'yatzer ledes behem. However, there are those that are machmir and say that you cannot wash the netilas yadayim with water that's heated to the degree of yatzer ledes. If somebody is in a situation where he has no other water to use, he should not be machmer. Because the main opinion, the opinion that we follow, is the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch, who says that even yatzer ledes water is kosher for netilas yadayim. Ubefeishrin, when it comes to lukewarm water, ein iser klal l'kulei alma. Everybody agrees that there's no iser whatsoever. It's 100% lechatchila to wash netilas yadayim with warm water. Va'afilu im hayu chamin mitchila, and even if you have water that was heated up to the degree of yatzer ledes, where we have this yesh, where we have this yesh machmirin. If you have water that was heated up to the degree of yatzer ledes, where we do have this yesh machmirin that says that you shouldn't use it, but says the Mishnah Berurah, if it was heated up to that degree, but then it cooled off and it became lukewarm, everybody would agree that there's no isser to use that whatsoever. Well, if he's that, and therefore, says the Mishnah Berurah, according to this, if somebody has no other water, ki im chamin shayatzer ledes behen, the only water that he has available to him is water that is so hot that it's yatze ledes, Yera lahamtin mat, he should wait a little bit, achi yistanenu b'miktsas, until it cools down a little bit, shaloyeh hayatze ledes behen, so it should be cooler than the temperature of yatze ledes, v'yamuter l'kulei alma, and then everybody will agree that it's 100% mutter to use this water. Okay, now we go to Siv Zayin, last two words on Nun Gimel Amud Aleph in the Shulchan Aruch. All right, so now we're going to discuss washing Netilas Yadayim with Chamei Tiveria. What's Chamei Tiveria? Chamei Tiveria are hot springs in Tiveria. This was naturally hot water. It issues from its source, already heated, so this is a hot spring. But the Chamei Tiveria had another property, and that is that the waters of the Chamei Tiveria were not roi lishtias kelev. The reason being, the Mechaber is going to say later on, that the waters were merurim. They were bitter, very, very bitter waters. And therefore, they're not roi lishtias kelev. Now, we've already mentioned, that water that's not roi lishtias kelev is not suitable for use for the Netilas Yadayim. So right away, the Mechaber says over here, Chamei Tiveria. Well, let's stop for a second. Let's give a little bit more of a hakdama. Let's give a little bit of a broader hakdama over here, because this is actually a very complicated topic. So again, the Chamei Tiveria are naturally heated waters. Now, the heat is not an issue. We just said that Chamei Ha'or, we just said that water that's heated by fire, you're allowed to use that water for Netilas Yadayim. Naturally heated water can also be used for Netilas Yadayim, at least the way we paskin over here. So the fact that the Chamei Tiveria are hot, that's not stopping us from using it for Netilas Yadayim. The problem with the Chamei Tiveria is that they're not roi lishtias kelev, and therefore they're puzzle for use for Netilas Yadayim. But how about Tfilas Yadayim? I don't want to do Netilas Yadayim from a keli. What I want to do is I want to immerse my hands in the Chamei Tiveria, and I want to accomplish Tfilas Yadayim instead of Netilas Yadayim. So says the Mechaber like this: Chamei Tiveria, the Chamei Tiveria, Yachol lahatbil bohem es hayadayim. You're allowed to do Tfilas Yadayim in the Chamei Tiveria, avolito mehem bekli loy. But to do Netilas Yadayim from a keli, that is aser from the Chamei Tiveria. Now let's take a look right away over here at the Mishnah Berurah Chavches. Lahatbil bahem. If you want to immerse your hands in the Chamei Tiveria in order to accomplish Tfilas Yadayim, that you're allowed to do. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Chavches, Kechol mayonos. Just like you're allowed to accomplish Tfilas Yadayim in any other mayon, in any other natural spring, natural flowing water, you're allowed to do Tfilas Yadayim. So too over here by the Chamei Tiveria, you could do Tfilas Yadayim. The Chamei Tiveria mayonhu. The Chamei Tiveria are a mayon. They're a hot spring. So it's a spring. You're allowed to do Tfilas Yadayim in a spring. And when it comes to a spring, remember, you don't even need our boim saw. You don't need 40 saw to do Tfilas Yadayim in a mayon. In a mayon, all you need is enough water that you could submerge both hands at one time in the water. That's enough for Tfilas Yadayim. That's enough water for the share of Tfilas Yadayim in a mayon. So you're allowed to do Tfilas Yadayim in Chamei Tiveria because it's like any other mayon. Va'afilu ein behem arba'am sa, the Mishnah Berurah says. And this is true even if you don't have a volume of arba'am sa. V'chanal, like we saw earlier, b'simin kuf nun tes if you're daled. Okay. Aval litel mehen, but the Mechaber said to wash the Netilas Yadayim with a keli from the Chamei Tiveria, that you're not allowed to do. Says the Mishnah Berurah Chavches, aval litel mehem, that you can't do. Va'afilu mima'ayin gadol sheyesh by arba'am sa. This is true even if you'll find a part of the Chamei Tiveria where there's so much water that you have arba'am sa. You're still not allowed to take a keli and wash the Netilas Yadayim with a keli from the Chamei Tveria. You're not allowed to do that. It's cut limud b'chliloi. To do Netilas Yadayim with a keli from the Chamei Tveria, you're not allowed to do. Va'afilu b'nitztaninu aser. And even if you allow the water to cool down, you're still not allowed to use the Chamei Tveria for Netilas Yadayim from a keli, because that's not the problem. The heat is not the problem. The problem is mishum de'enam ru'uyim l'shtias kelev. The problem is that this water is not roy l'shtias kelev. Ukidol kamei sivches, like we're going to see shortly in Hashem in sivches, where the Mechaber is going to spell out that the problem with Netilas Yadayim Bekli from the Chamei Tveria is that the waters are merurim, they're exceptionally bitter, and therefore they're not roy l'shtias kelev, and therefore they're not suitable for Netilas Yadayim. Okay, so halacha number 1 over here in Siv Zayin is Chamei Tveria are kosher for Tvilas Yadayim. You can immerse your hands into the Chamei Tveria and accomplish Tvilas Yadayim. And we learned that if you do that, the bracha you're going to make is still Asher Kedishanu B'Mitzvaysav Tzivanu Al Netilas Yadayim. So you could do Tvilas Yadayim in Chamei Tveria. However, you cannot do Netilas Yadayim B'Kli from Chamei Tveria. Why? Because the water is not roy l'shtias kelev, and when you're doing Netilas Yadayim from a keli, you need mayim that's roy l'shtias kelev. Another thing we see here in the Mishnah Berurah is that for Tvilas Yadayim into the Chamei Tveria, then just like any other mayon, you don't need arba amsa. You only need enough water that you would theoretically be able to submerge both hands at one time in the water. That's enough water to accomplish Tvilas Yadayim. Now, the Mechaber is going to discuss the following case. What if what we did is, we took the Chamei Tveria, and we dug a little bit of an irrigation canal, and we allow water from the Chamei Tveria to run out of the banks of the Mayon. It's running out of the spring through this irrigation canal, and now I dam up the irrigation canal. So now I have water that came from the Chamei Tveria, and it's no longer connected to the Chamei Tveria. What can I not do with that water? So the Mechaber says like this. Well, let's first analyze this a little bit in the context of the halacha that we saw already in Siman Kuf Nun Tes Sif Yodalad. If you draw water, not with a keli, when I say draw, I don't mean that you're using a bucket or a keli. The exact scenario that we just discussed. If you make a chritz, if you make an irrigation canal, or you make a tzinar, you make a half pipe that's not a keli, and you allow water to flow from the mayan, and you allow it to flow out of the mayan, and you let it collect, let's say, on the ground. Could you do Tvilas Yadayim in that water? Yes, you can. How much water do you need? How much water do you need is now going to be a shaila. Because if you allow the water to flow out of the mayan and to go into a depression in the ground, especially if you dam it up and the two waters are no longer connected, now that's no longer mei mayan. Now that's mikvah water. Now, mikvah water, we saw machlokes in Siman Kuf Nun Tes. How much water do you need to accomplish Tvilas Yadayim in mikvah water? We had one opinion that said that you need arba amsa, and we had another opinion that said, no, you don't need arba amsa. You need the same amount of water that you would need for a mayon. How much water is that? Enough water that you could submerge both hands at the same time in the water. That's the machlokes that we saw in Siman Kuf Nun Tes. So, if we remove the two words Chamei Tveria from the scenario that we're analyzing today, and we imagine that this is not specifically Chamei Tveria, it's any old stream, river, lake, not a lake. A lake is not mayon. A lake is not flowing water. But let's say you have a river, right? You have a river. You have flowing water in the river. And now I make a tzinar, I make a pipe, and I divert water from the river, and it comes through this half pipe, which is not a keli, so it doesn't make the water mayim she'uvim, and I divert the water into a ditch, and now I remove the half pipe. So now I have water that originated in the river. It's no longer connected to the river. It's now gathered in a ditch in the ground. That's the machloikis in Siman Kuf Nun Tes. One sheet is machmer and holds I need mem sa, I need 40 sa, because tvila in a mikveh requires 40 sa, and this is a mikveh. And then there's a more kuladik opinion who says, no, I don't need 40 sa. It gets the same din as a mayon. I need only enough water to be able to submerge both my hands at the same time. That's what the halacha would be. The problem is that over here we're dealing with Chamei Tveria. And because we're dealing with Chamei Tveria, there's a new problem. What's the problem? The problem is that the water of Chamei Tveria has a major halachic difference than the water of the Hudson River or the Raritan River. And what is that? That is that the water of the Hudson River or the Raritan River or any other Mayon, that water is kosher for Tfilas Yadayim. It's also kosher for Netilas Yadayim. If I'm standing on the banks of the Hudson River and I have a tuna fish sandwich, I have two roots in front of me in order to be matar in my hands and wash to be kaveh sud on my tuna fish sandwich. One is I could take a keli and I could dip it into the river and I could wash good old standardized Netilas Yadayim from a kli. Or I could be a little bit more mechudash and I could dunk my hands into the Hudson River and I could do Tfilas Yadayim. Either route is completely acceptable. If I'm dealing with the Hudson, if I'm dealing with the Raritan, if I'm dealing with a stream in the middle of the woods. Any old Mayan, I have two routes in front of me. I could do Netilas Yadayim or Tfilas Yadayim. Not so Chamei Tveria. Chamei Tveria, I could do Tfilas Yadayim because it's a Mayan, but I cannot do Netilas Yadayim because it's not Roy L'Shtias Kelev. So Chamei Tveria present an additional problem that no other Mayan presents, or no typical Mayan presents. Now, why does that matter to our Shaila? So again, the first halacha that we saw over here in Siv Zayin was very straightforward. You could do Tfilas Yadayim in the Chamei Tveria, but you cannot do Netilas Yadayim from the Chamei Tveria. But now, the Mechaber is branching out to a new scenario. Now the Mechaber wants to know what happens if you divert the water from the Chamei Tveria and you allow it to flow into a ditch and you break the connection between the water in the ditch and the Chamei Tveria. Now what you've done is you've created a mikveh, but it's a mikveh that's made out of Chamei Tveria water. Normally the halacha would be the machlokes of Siman Kuf Nun Tes. We have a machmer opinion that you need 40 sa, and we have a makel opinion that you don't need 40 sa. But over here, since we're talking about Chamei Tveria, and Chamei Tveria water is not kosher for Netilas Yadayim from a keli, we have a new wrinkle. And that is that the Gemara in Chulin on Kovav Amud Aleph says that Rabbi Yochanan holds, if you divert Chamei Tveria and you create a mikveh out of Chamei Tveria, you get that water is not even kosher for Tfilas Yadayim. Why? Because if people will see that you're using that water for Tfilas Yadayim, they might think that you could use it for the Netilas Yadayim from a keli. Now, why doesn't Rabbi Yochanan have that problem with the Chamei Tveria when the Chamei Tveria are located in their source? Because when the Chamei Tveria are located in their source, nobody is going to make that mistake. Everybody sees that you're doing Tfilas Yadayim in a Mayon, and everybody knows that Tfilas Yadayim in a Mayon works and is a different din than the Netilas Yadayim. Nobody is going to turn around and say, oh, if the Chamei Tveria is kosher for Tfilas Yadayim, it must also be kosher for Netilas Yadayim from a keli. That mistake, they could see that there's a difference between those two. But once you divert the water from the Chamei Tveria and you allow it to gather in a mikveh in the ground, and now you go ahead and you use it for Tfilas Yadayim, then people might make a mistake and they might think that it's kosher also for Netilas Yadayim. So this is the Gzeira of Rabbi Yochanan. The additional wrinkle that we're going to have over here is that there are a couple of machloikesin exactly when did Rabbi Yochanan make this Gzeira. So now, against this backdrop, let's take a look at what the Mechaber says over here. Says the Mechaber near the end of the top line on the Gimel Amud Beis. V'im himshich oisan ba'aretz derech chritz chutz limud. If you divert the water from the Chamei Tveria through an irrigation canal, you make a depression in the ground to divert water from the Chamei Tveria so that it runs through a canal on the ground. Or you make a tzinor, you make a half pipe, which is also not a keli. And you divert the water chutz limud. You divert the water out of its source. So it's no longer in the banks of the Chamei Tveria. And then, v'hifsikon mehamayim hanoivea. And then you dam up the irrigation canal. So you have now broken the connection between the mikveh that you created and the Chamei Tveria. So again, get this picture straight in your head. What you did over here was you had the Chamei Tveria. You made an irrigation ditch to allow water to flow out of the Chamei Tveria and gather in a mikveh, in a depression in the ground. And then you dammed up the irrigation canal, so now there is no longer any connection between the mikveh that you have created and the Chamei Tveria that were its original source. In that case, says the Mechaber like this, Im yesh bahem shir mikveh, if the mikveh that you created has a shear of 40 sa, then matbila behem hayodayim. Then you could go ahead and you could do tfilas yadayim in that mikveh. Why? Because what the Mechaber is telling you is that when all the dust settles, the Mechaber feels that Rabbi Yochanan's Gzeira in Masechtas Chulin does not apply to this case. Rabbi Yochanan's Gzeira was that under certain conditions, I don't want you to use water that originated in the Chamei Tveria, even for Tfilas Yadayim, because if somebody sees that you're using it for Tfilas Yadayim, you might come to use it for Netilas Yadayim from a Keli. Says the Mechaber, that Gzeira is not Negeya if you have a mikveh of 40 sa. Why? The logic seems to be like this. The same way you're allowed to do Tfilas Yadayim in the Chamei Tveria itself, and we're not afraid that someone's going to dip a keli into the Chamei Tveria and do Netilas Yadayim with the Chamei Tveria. Why? Because they understand that there's a difference in halacha between Tfilas Yadayim and Netilas Yadayim. So too, if you divert the water from the Chamei Tveria and you create a mikveh that has arboim sa, so it's a real bona fide mikveh, when somebody sees you do Tfilas Yadayim in a mikveh of arboim sa, that is not going to lead them to right away say, oh, if it's kosher for Tfilas Yadayim, it must also be kosher for Netilas Yadayim. They're not going to make that mistake. So therefore, says the Mechaber, if you have 40 sa, then there's no Gzeira. V'im ein bahem shir mikveh loy. But if you don't have 40 sa, then we have to make a Gzeira Tevila atu Netila. If you don't have 40 sa, so then somebody's going to see you're doing Tfilas Yadayim in less than 40 sa of Chamei Tveria water. That doesn't sound like Tvila. Tvila, excuse me. Tvila is usually in a mikveh. Mikveh is usually our bam sa. You don't have our bam sa over here. So if you could dip your hands into a little bit of Chamei Tveria gathered in the ground, mistama you could do it until you're dying bekeli. Also, we make a gzeira, and therefore it doesn't work. Excuse me. Then says the Mechaber like this. V'im chritz ze meimav michubarim lemei hamayon hanoveacham. And what if you never broke the connection between the Chamei Tveria and the mikveh that you created? So you made your chritz, you made your irrigation canal, you diverted the water from the Chamei Tveria into your depression in the ground, but you didn't make a dam in the chritz. The Chamei Tveria and the water in the mikveh are still connected. How about in that case? So the Mechaber says, then it's a machlokes rishonim. V'im chritz zeh meimav mechubarim lemei hamayin hanoveacham. If the water in the ditch is still connected to the Chamei Tveria because you didn't break the connection between the chritz, between the irrigation canal, and the Chamei Tveria, so then it's machlokes rishonim. La Rashi v'harashba ein matbilin by hayadayim. According to Rashi and the Rashba, you still have over here a gzera. Since you're going ahead and you're doing tfilas yadayim over here in the mikveh water over here, there's the gzera of Rabbi Yochanan, and we have to be geyser tefillah atu netila ulaharav Rabbeinu Yoina matbilin bayis yadayim. But Rabbeinu Yoina would say that no, you could do tfilas yadayim. People see that this is connected to the Chamei Tveria, so people will look at it as if you're doing tefillah in the Chamei Tveria. People know that tefillah, we're okay with tefillah directly in the Chamei Tveria. Since this is connected, it's as if you're doing tefillah in the Chamei Tveria, and we're not going to be geyser. But according to Rashi and the Rashba, over here already, it's true that it's connected to the Chamei Tveria, but you're not doing the tefillah in the Chamei Tveria. You're doing the tefillah in a mikveh that came from the Chamei Tveria. Rashi and the Rashba say that that's Rabbi Yochanan's gzera, and you can't do that tefillas yadayim. Okay, complicated. I hope that this was clear. Let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, cut lamed aleph derech chritz. If you diverted the water through a little irrigation canal, shebekarka, you made a depression in the ground so that the water could flow out of the Chamei Tveria into a pool. V'hu adinam halach derech tzinar, or you made a half pipe. Imena lov shem keli, as long as it's a half pipe that doesn't become a keli, so it doesn't make the mayim she'uvim. Oiskat lamed beis v'hifsikon. In the first case over here discussed by the Mechaber, you made a dam in the tzinar or in the chritz, so you broke the connection between the Chamei Tveria and the mikveh. Me'amayon, you were mafsik, you made a disconnect between the mikveh and the mayon. Does bottle mimenu taras mayon. So now it's no longer connected to the mayon, and when you're doing tfilas yadayim, you're no longer doing it in the mayon. Ve'inam rak mikveh. Now it's only a mikveh. So then the Mechaber said, if you have our boim saw in the mikveh, matbilan behem, you could do tefillah. Ta'ashtakal gufay toivel behem. Our boim saw is always kosher for tefillah. Yadav lokolshkein. Certainly you could do your hands. And it's interesting that Mishnah Berurah doesn't seem to say this. And Rabbi Yochanan's gzera won't apply over here. Why won't Rabbi Yochanan's gzera apply? Because people will see that you're being toivel yadayim. You're doing tefillas yadayim in a mikveh of 40 saw. That's not going to make them make the leap. Oh, if you could do tefillas yadayim, you could do netilas yadayim from a keli. But if ain't bahem, but if you don't have our bom sa in the mikveh, then you cannot do tefillas yadayim. And says the Mishnah Berurah, this is true. Even according to the more makel opinion that we had in Siman Kuf Nun Tes, who says that when you want to do tefillas yadayim in a mikveh, you don't need our bom sa. Over here, you do need our bar mitzvah. Why? Because over here we're dealing with Chamei Tveria and we're dealing with Rabbi Yochanan's gzeira. V'afla machshirin le'el b'simin kufto tesif yudal b'pachas be'arba mitzvah af b'mikvah. Hacha b'Chamei Tveria moidu. Over here by Chamei Tveria, even the Mekilim will say that you cannot do tefillas yadayim in this mikveh that was created from Chamei Tveria, and the connection to the Chamei Tveria was broken. You cannot do tefillah in that pool if you don't have our bam sa. Why? Because of Rabbi Yochanan's gzera. The gazrinan, because you make a gzera im navoy lahatpil yodayim heichadav sekinu me'amayin. If somebody is going to see you doing tfilas yadayim in less than 40 sa, in a pool that's disconnected from the Chamei Tveria, Yomru dahamayim shechamei Tveria hem kishar mayim, they're going to say, oh, that's a raya that Chamei Tveria water is just like any other water, v'yavayu lito mehem af bekli, and they'll come to do netilas yadayim from a keli, which you cannot do with Chamei Tveria because it's not royal l'shtiyas kelev. Oiskan lamed hey, ein matbilin. This goes on according to Rashi and the Rashba. If you did not break the connection between the mikvah and the Chamei Tveria, you can't do tfilas yadayim in that water. The gam bazeh gozru, again because of Rabbi Yochanan's gzera, shemeyava lital gam bekli, keva da'afsekinu mimakaymon, because since you diverted the water out of the Chamei Tveria into a chritz, ve'ein behem atzvam 40 sa, and you don't have 40 sa right away over here. In other words, Rashi and the Rashba are very machmer. Rashi and the Rashba say, even though the water in the pool that you created is still attached to the source, it's still attached to the Chamei Tveria, it doesn't matter. You can't do tfilas yadayim if you don't have 40 sa right over here. Why? Because Gzera Atu Netilas Yadayim. People are going to see you doing Tfilas Yadayim in Chamei Tveria water that's less than 40 sa, and it's not in the Mayan proper. They're going to think you could do Netilas Yadayim. So they're geyser. V'dasa Rav Rabbeinu Yoina, but Rabbeinu Yoina is Mekel. He disagrees. And he says, Kevin de Mechuberes Lamei Mayan. Since the bottom line is this water is still connected to the Chamei Tveria, it's still connected to the source. The kosher after tfilas gufay, and therefore the water over here would even be kosher to mamish bitovel your guf. Shavloi shaykh lemigzar shebeyav litalaf bekli. There's no room for gzera over here of tevila atu nitila. Okay, sivches tam psol Chamei Tveria lenitila. The reason why Chamei Tveria water is a apostle for the Netilas Yadayim, memnei shein morim, because they're exceedingly bitter, ve'enam ru'uyim l'shtiyas kelev, and they're not roi even for drinking by a dog. Avalim yimtzu ma'im chamin noivim shein ru'uyim l'shtiyas kelev. But if you have a natural flowing hot spring and the water is roi l'shtiyas kelev, noitla mehem l'yadayim, then it's kosher even for the Netilas Yadayim from a keli. The fact that it's hot is not a psul. The psul is the fact that it's not royal l'shtiyas kelev. Oiskan lamed vav in the Mishnah Berurah neishem marim ve'enam ru'uyim, and they're not roy for shtiyas kelev ukidol kamei b'sif tes. The ilu machmas chami musan, because as far as the heat, a livsal, that's not a psul. Ukabesha kasav amachaber b'sif vav. Oiskan lamed zayin, it's not royal l'shtiyas kelev. I'm sorry, the Mechaber said that if you find other natural hot springs that are roi l'shtiyas kelev, then you could use that water. Even if the water happens to taste very noticeably different than regular water, but if it's roi l'shtiyas kelev, you could use it. Even if it's not so palatable for a person to drink it, you should know. The ladasa yesh makmirin shekasavnu le'el b'Mishnah Berurah Siman cotton chav zayin le'inyan chamei or. We had one chamerdik opinion earlier in today's shir that said if you have mayim chamim, that's yad seledes. If you have water heated to the degree that the hand would jump back so as not to be burned. So we said we have one chamerdik opinion who says that you can't use that water for the Netilas Yadayim. Then certainly that mandiyama would be machmir over here when it comes to a natural hot spring, because it never was suitable, it never was cool. From its bria, it was always hot. Okay, we're going to stop over here. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. Discussing limud HaTorah should be megan against Klal Yisrael. The Rabbi should send Yeshua for first pronounce it shidduchim to those in need. We should be zeichet to see the BS called Tzedek Be'erev Yameinu. Amen. Be well.